I want to revisit your good video, and in it you're encouraging people to respond to setbacks and things that don't go well by saying good, by leaning into the discomfort, by seeing it as an opportunity.
But for the most part, you're going to run into challenges in life, and if you curl up into a ball and complain about it, that's not going to help you. And if you say, okay, cool, good, here's some adjustments I can make to move forward, that's going to be a better move than cowering.
All right, today is another episode in the mental skill series. We are going to talk about the skill, we're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, and how you can apply it to bodybuilding, specifically in the context of hunger. Let's get to the episode. So let's start off with why this might be an important skill for you. The skill is acceptance. I'm a therapist by training, clinical psychologist, and I really enjoy acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance is an extremely powerful tool for whenever the thing or emotion, sensation, whatever it is, whatever you're going through, whenever that thing isn't likely to go away. So in the context of bodybuilding, the thing, especially during contest prep, that isn't going to go away is your sensation of hunger, which is why I think developing the skill of acceptance or willingness is going to be very powerful. Let's get to what acceptance isn't. Acceptance does not mean that we like the feeling. It does not mean we like the sensation. It does not mean that we wish it to be here. Acceptance doesn't mean that you have to enjoy the thing that's going on. If there are things within your control to change, by all means, utilize those skills if they do not impact your long-term gains, whether it be in bodybuilding or in life. If there is something in your control that you can utilize in a way that isn't going to detract from other areas of your life, enact, engage there. However, much like life, in bodybuilding, sort of this mirror for life, there are things that are going to happen to you that you can't change. And the experience of hunger, although it can be modulated, I think we go too far in that direction of trying to sort of modulate those hunger signals, when in reality, working to make room for the feeling of hunger, being willing to experience the hunger, is going to be more powerful for us in the long run. Acceptance, willingness, it is also not putting up with the sensation. Now, I know it's cliche, but you put up with your mother-in-law, you put up with the guy who's curling in the squat rack, you put up with the girl who calls you out for walking in front of her camera after she films her 19th set of split foot elevated frog pump deficit cable crossovers. You put up with those things. That is not what acceptance is. Acceptance is openness to experiencing difficult thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and allowing them to be there. And a step further from that is getting curious about those sensations. The first thing I like to do whenever we're talking about acceptance is take a look at what all we've tried. I have tried a ton of things to modulate my hunger while I'm dieting. Here are some of the things that I've tried. Let me know in the comments if you all have tried these things, or if you have something interesting that you've tried that I haven't tried. I'd be more than willing to take a look at that because this is fun. So here we go. So keep track. High fiber foods, check. I think we all switch to, or if you haven't, you probably are going to try to switch to very highly fibrous foods, lots of green veggies, a lot of these protein bars nowadays, tons of fiber there. So just upping the fiber to an exorbitant amount. Intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting, I think conceptually for dieting, it's great to shorten your eating window so that you can have bigger meals. I'm a fan of bigger meals, and this helps me with hunger, and I think I naturally do it anyways. If you don't get too crazy with it, like having an 8-hour eating window isn't something that's crazy, because you can have your first meal, like let's say you wake up and your eating window is 9 to 5. You wake up, 7, you give it a couple hours. If you haven't worked out or something, first meal's at 9, and then you can have one at 12, and then you can have one at, 2:33, and then you can have your last meal right at 5. That's pretty reasonable. That gets you in enough meals with enough meal frequency, and you can spread your protein out. That's great. That's fantastic. But as you get deeper into a diet, that window gets tighter and tighter and tighter, because you want your meals to be larger and larger, because the thing you're chasing isn't optimal meal frequency or optimal protein intake at that point. It's just the feeling of fullness. You're chasing fullness. So when you find yourself chasing that fullness and that eating window shrinks from an 8-hour window to a 6-hour window to a 4-hour window, you have to stop and ask yourself, what am I doing? What am I trying to avoid? And if the idea behind shrinking that eating window is just to avoid the feeling of hunger, I challenge you to try something else. Other things I've tried, xanthan gum in shakes. This is a really cool thing. And actually, you know what? I'm not going to knock it entirely. Adding xanthan gum to various shake recipes adds volume to the shakes and can make them a bit more filling if you have like a Ninja blender or something like that. So xanthan gum. And then on the back end, which I think we all do this, tons of liquids, tons more water, coffees, sodas, energy drinks, anything to, up the caffeine a little bit so we have energy, because part of feeling like crap is, we're energy restricted. We don't have as many carbohydrates and fats to, one, maintain sort of optimal hormone production and then maintain our energy levels. We're just going to feel less energetic, a bit more lethargic. We're just going to up those drinks with caffeine in them. Last favorite thing is, chewing gum. Chewing gum like crazy. Probably at my peak of trying to avoid hunger, like a pack a day, which is, that's probably not great, but you get the half a calorie to a calorie gum and you have a couple pieces here and there, probably not so bad. If you find yourself eating a pack a day, probably need to let's transition into what acceptance is. All right, so moving into acceptance. So what we want to eventually be able to understand that feeling hungry is an intrinsic part of the process of dieting, part of the process of bodybuilding. We want to get to that that Ronnie Coleman I can't do the impression very well. Or if you're a fan of Jocko, he has sort of this Jocko mentality of good. And my sort of assessment of that is if what you are doing right now is hard, good. Like that's it. You just sort of add that onto the end of everything that you are thinking and feeling, because it acknowledges the fact that for the most part, this is the way this should feel. Good. Now, my sort of modification to that good mentality is when I am experiencing hunger in bodybuilding, I take a couple deep breaths and I say the word yep. So I want to help you all get to yep. So this is a really cool thing to practice in the off season whenever you're bulking, gaining, whatever you want to call it, and you haven't had your first meal. I definitely recommend practicing this when you are outside of a sort of contest preparation or dieting phase, because the first time you sort of employ these strategies, you do not want to already be on the battlefield. You want to be outside in a training scenario where I'm going to get several very large meals with lots of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and I'm going to feel fine immediately after. But I think before your first meal in the morning, exploring how long it takes for you to get hungry, what the actual sort of physical sensation of hunger feels like versus, just sort of craving something or being triggered by a food that you see. Having that time set aside, practicing, is going to be much better off and will add to a sort of transfer of skills when you actually need this. So the first step in getting to yup, notice and name what you're feeling. So in the case of contest prep, in the case of this video, hunger. Once you notice it, just saying out loud, I'm feeling hungry. That allows you to distance yourself from that thought by just sort of saying it out loud. It allows you to diffuse from it, somewhat unhook from it, and it is not something that is sort of just rolling around in your head over and over and over again, and your sort of internal monologue isn't taking over, and you're not negotiating with yourself. So you say it out loud. You notice, you name it. I'm feeling hungry. Number 2. If you didn't catch that previous video on mindful muscle, check that out because that'll give you a great skill, 10-5-1, on sort of how to breathe. The next thing you're going to want to do after you notice and name it, you're going to want to breathe into it for a couple of minutes. Take a few deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. You can give a little hold, and then out through your mouth. You want to breathe out slower than you're breathing in. You can purse your lips like you're blowing out of a straw. And just get into a comfortable rate of breathing. And you want to breathe into the sensation of feeling hungry. While you're breathing into it, you're going to notice that your mind maybe won't wander, but it will begin to focus on the sensation of hunger. It may wander to your next meal, which that often happens to me, may wander onto the workout that you slowly, gradually, as contest prep gets longer, begin dreading, mostly cardiovascular workouts. But your job while you're breathing is to just notice the thoughts that come up, notice the sensations you have in your body, and just breathe into it and see if you can begin making room for the thing that you're feeling. Sort of a modifier skill is getting curious about what it is that you're feeling. So if you were to, this is going to sound weird, but if you were to remember what it was like to be a kid and all the things in the world were new again, everything felt novel and cool, and just you had such a I hate to use the word curiosity again, but you had a curiosity about almost anything. Like if you wanted to, like you could, if I told you to look at your hand, like it was the first time you had ever seen your hand, that's the type of curiosity I'm talking about. So shifting that from your hand to your hunger, getting really curious about this sensation, like how big does it feel? Is it a small pit in your stomach? Can you modify it? What shape is it? Can you give it a color? Can you breathe into it and sort of mentally expand around it in your mind? Can you get curious about its properties inside of you? The point of getting curious is if you're curious about something, you are not adding negativity to it. You're allowing the emotion, you're willing, you're accepting, you're making room for the thing, and you're also not begrudgingly like letting it be there. To be curious is to be interested in these certain properties of whatever it is that you are sort of taking in with your senses. And that also helps sort of distance ourselves from these thoughts of needing to feel full or needing to do anything to sort of get rid or get away or push down that hunger. So getting curious is the modifier skill. Then what you can do is begin trying to normalize this for yourself. So number one, from like an evolutionary perspective, in terms of dieting and especially in terms of bodybuilding, especially in the leaner categories, the bodybuilding, the women's physique, women's bodybuilding, things like that, whenever you're shooting for, whenever the look you're shooting for is like striated glutes, normalizing this hunger from an evolutionary perspective is, I don't want to say it's powerful, but it helps. The more you can normalize this sensation from various levels of analysis, so this would be sort of a distal, sort of ultimate level of analysis. Your body was not meant to get this lean. It was meant to function in various ranges of fats, but in the past, in our ancestors' history, in our environment of evolutionary adaptiveness, whenever someone was this lean, they were going through a starvation process, and systems in their body were triggered to try and get them to consume as many calories as possible. The hunger that you are feeling deeper and deeper into a prep from an evolutionary perspective is normal. You are feeling what all of our ancestors in the most, recent and distant history have felt whenever they have gotten that lean. You are connected, you are aligned, you are a human. This is what this should feel like from an evolutionary perspective. From a proximate, more sort of here and now perspective, your leptin and ghrelin signals are going to be wild. You're never going to get full. You're always going to be hungry, which those are sort of two sides of a coin. Feeling full and being hungry are two different ways that sort of deep into contest dieting are going to affect your psychology, because if you can never get full and you're always feeling hungry, that's just like two evil sides to some coin. It's like a Destructo Disc. It really is. So like never feeling full and always feeling hungry is like Krillin just like shooting a Destructo Disc at you. And that is what that feels like. Never feeling full, always being hungry. The Destructo Disc of fitness and dieting. So again, from a proximate perspective with our hormones, this type of dieting, this is what this should feel like. Yep, sort of shifting to, I have chosen this. This is the sport I have chosen to compete in. I know that this is an aspect of this sport, and I know that this isn't going to be forever. This is not the way this is going to be forever. This is only the way it's going to be for right now, and for a short time after my competition or after I'm done cutting, when I reverse out of my diet or sort of recovery diet, 3DMJ, check them out again, and I get back to a normal calorie set point and body fat set point. Sort of a side note and tangent, you're not going to be lean forever. Don't strive to be lean forever. You need a certain amount of body fat. Yes, that is different for all of us, but putting on body fat post-show is going to happen. It should happen. Back on track. Another thing we could do to normalize it. All these successful bodybuilders who have come before me, all these successful fitness enthusiasts and people who have dropped weight have felt hunger. This is what this should feel like. And then linking it to a past experience. Do you remember the first time you had DOMs? Like the first time you had like a really good leg day? You're crippled. You're absolutely crippled. Or at least I was crippled. Like in the best way. Like crippled in my muscles. Like not crippled in my knees or in my low back or anything like that. Like the first time you ever squatted to full depth, like high bar back squatted, or really learned how to use a leg press, your quads were messed up. The first time you lunged appropriately, your glutes like falling off of your body for days afterwards. But you got used to that sensation. Your body adapted to that sensation. You adapted to that same sensation. And then oddly enough, you probably, you masochist, began to like that sensation. And so much so now that your training doesn't really get you anywhere near that soreness. And you would, what I would give to be that sore again. I mean, I guess I could pump the volume. I know that's not right, but to be that sore again after like 2 sets of something, like that would be wild. That would be fantastic. So feeling and exploring hunger, linking it to sort of that first time you felt DOMS, and how over time and with enough practice, you began to understand that this was a part of the process. Linking it to DOMS can be a good metaphor for sort of understanding and exploring what hunger means to you, what it can mean to you. So you're doing all that. So you're breathing, you're noticing, you're naming, you're getting curious about what you're feeling, you're exploring its properties inside your body, not literally, in your mind. Don't go in there with like a knife and a fork and explore. Just in your mind, explore the properties. Then you want to transition to normalizing it from multiple perspectives, evolutionarily, approximately with our hormones in the here and now, what other people have experienced. This is what it should feel like. Analogizing it to something that you felt before, like DOMS, always to sort of normalize the feeling. And after you sort of bring your focus back to your breath, yep, just say yup, and then move in your value direction. If that value direction is getting ready for work, if it's getting your kids ready for school, if it is training, if it is meal prep, if it is X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, if it's watching another episode of DBZ Abridged, which is super dope and I think I'm going to do after this, whatever that value direction is, that is what you do after you make room for the hunger. Because it is not enough. Like, these skills aren't going to stop the hunger from happening. They are going to allow you to expand, make room for, become more willing and accepting of, this is the experience. But you shouldn't stop there. You need to sort of replace that sort of behavior of ruminating. And, thinking can be a behavior if you are actively trying to problem solve your way out of the thing that you are feeling. And that is part of the issue too. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to replace those habits of trying to think your way out of this with other habits. And that habit, I dare say, I'm asking you all to do is head in the value direction. And that is self-defined. So that's not something that I'm giving you. Pick the direction that you want to go in that aligns with your values and goals and who you are as a person. And that's what you do after you've breathed into these feelings, after you've identified hunger, after you've normalized it, gone, yep, and sort of made room and accepted that this is a part of the process. Alrighty, folks, that is it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this skill. This is one of my favorite skills to practice. This is one of the most common skills that I find that can be helpful and applicable in a bodybuilding and fitness setting. If you enjoy it, please comment down below, subscribe, especially if you're like a DBZ Abridged fan. Like, look, I love my DBZ fans and I love anybody who has struggled through all those filler episodes. However, Dragon Ball Z Abridged, that is Dragon Ball Z. So I hope to hear you all in the comments, and like, subscribe, comment, critique, whatever you feel like doing. Just thank you all for being here, and I'll catch you next time.